Good evening. Can you all hear me okay? Beautiful, thank you. Sit tight, I'll be right back. All right. Good evening, everybody. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here. We'll go ahead and join palms as we begin. And repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. And I take refuge in the Sangha. Keeping the palms joined. Yeah, you can go ahead and put your palms down. So welcome everybody to Intro to Buddhism and Meditation. Thanks for being here. I usually like to start out with a question just to get us all kind of starting and communicating with each other. It's nice, even though we're kind of scattered all over the place, to a lot of you know each other, and just to see familiar names sometimes is helpful, and just to know that there are other people there that you can communicate with. So as a question tonight, let's start with how often you judge others. Pretty simple question. And this is one that I lead and facilitate a lot of groups, and this topic comes up a lot. And well, actually, I'll leave it at that. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. How often do you judge others? Is it something that's common for you? I don't want to say too much because I don't want to potentially influence the way people respond, but how often do you judge others? Constantly, all the time, mostly me, a lot, and maybe particularly today, all the time, more than I should. More than I'd like to admit. almost as much as I judge myself. Again, if you're just joining us, the question that I'm starting us with is, how much do we judge others? Less than I used to, but more than I'd like. Eddie says all the time. Too many to count. What else? How often do I judge others? More than I probably think I do. Again, there's a lot of levels to this and a lot that I could say on it. Ditto. But I'm just kind of starting with this right now, and then maybe I'll touch on a little bit more. So it's something good that it's actually quite nice to see the responses, because very often, and this is what I was starting to say earlier, very often when I bring up judgment, people will kind of jump into maybe excuses or rationalizations or justifications around judgment, as to how or why that we judge people. But these responses were, and often on those lines, I ask people to just kind of, rethink it and just be very honest with the question of how often do we judge, and not try to excuse it. But yeah, these answers are pretty right on, which is a good reflection of being honest with your own actions, your own thoughts, constantly and all the time. Katie, that would be a judgment as well, judging me. I'm thinking I'm a great teacher. It's funny because I might talk about that tonight. We'll see how tonight goes. But judgments are, they go both ways. And what I mean by that is the question of how often do you judge others. My guess is many people quickly defaulted to the negative judgments or critiques that they have of others. But the flip side to that is, what are the positive judgments that we have of others? Because those are equally judgments. And we want to be careful of those on both sides. Because these judgments that we have of people one way or the other aren't necessarily correct. They're just our perceptions of someone or something. And so I think as a practice of learning to be present and appreciating each moment as it is, and understanding everyone's dealing with their own journey, we want to be careful with the judgment that we have on others, positive or negative. This comes up a lot in Buddhist circles, or any circles really for that matter, that, I'm a big fan of people who share the Dharma, behaving in a certain way, and it's very challenging for those of us who do. But also for the people who receive the Dharma, to not put anyone who's sharing the Dharma on a pedestal, to think that they're any better than anybody else, or that they know more than anyone else, or that they're any more of a decent human being than anyone else. Just because one is good at sharing the Dharma, I always say, if I can do half of the things I talk about, I'd be thrilled, right? And I think very often the people that share the Dharma are ones that have hurt the most and maybe caused the most pain, and that's why they've turned so deeply to the practice, and therefore have found ways to turn around and share it. But it's a important, I think, lesson to learn as someone who receives the teachings, to understand that anyone who shares the Dharma with you, the Buddhist teachings or meditation, is no better or worse than you are. So to be careful of those again, I use the word pedestal that we may put people on. So I'll just kind of stop there for now. We'll go ahead and we'll start the meditation practice. There's a couple things I'll tell you before we begin, especially for those who might be new. Nothing's going to happen to you. You won't float away. You won't have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge the practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is it working? Is it not working? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? We're just going to sit. We're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside the room, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And the practice of meditation is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, help slide into the front third, pushing the stomach forward. Allows the back to straighten, shoulders are relaxed, hands can be on the knees or in the lap. I suggest closing the eyes if comfortable or slightly open. Mouth will be open or closed. I will guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important, don't expect anything. We're just going to sit and breathe. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open, mouth open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Knowing throughout the practice, you'll hear sounds. These are not distractions, not disruptions. Simply what's happening around us as we sit. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus, to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath, expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. And as the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it, release that thought, return attention, focus to the breath. Where's your mind? Return to breath. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, wanting nothing but to sit and breathe. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. Keeping the mind alert, aware of each sound. Each thought, each physical sensation, yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle, know what it's like to just sit and breathe, knowing with each breath There's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths slowly. And as you slowly open the eyes, slowly begin to move. Most important with the practice of meditation is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. And ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how you sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around you or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being no different than any one of us who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means very simply for all of us, regardless of where we come from or what we believe in or where we think we're going, our whole life is filled with things that happen. We react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's it. This practice is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you respond to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your day. So all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives, but with a mind that's steady, clear, focused. distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not an easy practice. It's not necessarily fun, but meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. Sitting, breathing, becoming aware of what you think, say, and do. Once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everything around us, and we work on changing our mind and our reaction to the world around us, life gets simpler. But it's a practice. So I think at this time, I always prefer to really just turn it over to you. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome. I'd like to open up to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with that I can address. And we'll go from there. So there's a chat box on the screen there. Go ahead and feel free to type your question or thoughts there, and I'll respond. And we'll use the rest of the time for that. Could you share your thoughts on right effort? Sure. Let me back up briefly, just for those who might be brand new to Buddhist teachings, just to give it some context with regards to right effort. The first thing the Buddha taught, the Four Noble Truths, said life is filled with dukkha, which is suffering. Doesn't mean all of life sucks. It just means you're going to suffer quite a bit. The second thing he says is, what's the cause? The cause is our greed, anger, ignorance. So we practice generosity, compassion, wisdom to overcome the greed, the anger, and the ignorance. The third one, he said, is the freedom from suffering, liberation, nirvana. And the fourth one, he said, is the path. This is the Eightfold Path. And these are your moral, ethical conduct and behavior practices that have a lot to do with really what is known as our karma, our actions. Karma is what we put into the world, what we think, what we say, and what we do. And all of this is played out in the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is really 8 simple steps in order that the Buddha talked about practicing to end or reduce suffering. And the Eightfold Path is having the correct or right views, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. Views, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. Now, when I look at effort, really with all of the Eightfold Path, the first thing I want to say is you have to look at intention behind them. regardless of what your action is, you have to look at the intention, right? Putting in a great effort to rob a bank is not the purpose. So first, let's look at the moral, ethical conduct and behavior, and what is the intention behind anything that we do. And then when it comes to right effort, which to me really also is the diligence of the practice, how hard do we work at it? Are we lazy? Do we get distracted easily? Do we procrastinate? Do we know what's the proper effort, which most of us do, and then do we, for whatever reason, just fail to do it? I think the practice of laziness is something that I would imagine, all fall victim to at times. And to understand that, yes, there are moments throughout our day, throughout our life, where we're going to have more energy than others. One of the things I'll never forget, which really stood out to me from my monastery time, this was 15 years ago, just a year in a Buddhist monastery in Taiwan. And these monks and nuns, they didn't waste any time. Even when we would walk from place to place, everything was mindful. When they had moments of stopping somewhere or rest, or whatever you want to call it, they were studying, chanting. So there wasn't any time that was wasted. The effort was incredibly strong. The diligence was incredibly strong, right? Now, no offense to any of you who watch Netflix. I watch Netflix. That's not my point. But the reality is, so many of us will say, I'm so busy, I don't have time. But we waste so much time. And sure, one could argue that, well, I need that downtime. I need that escape. I need that, whatever you want to call it. But really, the only reason we turn to those things is because we're not okay with the way things are. So right effort, right diligence is the last thing the Buddha said before he died, when they asked him who was going to teach us. And he said, I've left you all the teachings. Be enlightened to yourself and strive on with diligence. So I've always taken that teaching very seriously, because if you have someone who's very wise and teaches for 45 years, and that he chose to be his last message, I think that speaks very loudly. Another story I love is the Zen master Dogen, the founder of the Soto Zen school. He lived from 1200 to 1253. He would say, practice as if your hair is on fire. Now, I don't have to worry about that, nor do some of you I know watching this right now. But imagine that if your hair was on fire, you wouldn't just sit there and watch it burn. You wouldn't say, well, my hair's on fire, I'm going to watch Netflix for 6 hours and I'll get back to it. You would put it out immediately. So right effort really applies to, are you suffering? Are those around you suffering? Is the world in pain? Can you do more to alleviate the suffering of yourself and others? And the answer to that question, for I would imagine all of us, is yes. But do we still waste a lot of time doing things that are really not cultivating wisdom and compassion? Right? This isn't a judgment against watching Netflix for 3 hours. Like I said, I've watched Netflix for 3 hours, which doesn't make me good or bad or right or wrong. But the reality is, when you're doing these things, there is zero cultivation of compassion and wisdom. There is simply escaping. So for me, being around monks and nuns, there isn't the escape that we know of. There's the downtime, the rest time, which would be in a silent meditation or contemplation or reading or a walking meditation. There isn't the getting lost in distractions that most of us do. So those are just some thoughts on right effort. Hopefully that's helpful. Other thoughts, questions? You're welcome, Kelly. What else are we who will never live in a monastery missing out on? Uh, um, Nothing. I don't think that living in a monastery or living in a householder's life is really any different. You know, having experienced it, was it a very profound experience for me? Yes. Did it teach me a lot? Yes. But is it any different from where or how I live right now? No. As long as you keep your mind the same. If your mind is focused on right effort, if your mind is focused on what I, for me, really practice, which is the paramitas of generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, wisdom, if you apply generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, wisdom to everything you're doing, then it doesn't matter if you're in a monastery or at home with family. Your home is your monastery. Your family members are your masters and teachers. They are the people you practice with. They are the ones that we learn the most from. Monastery life is. I remember one time someone asked one of the nuns about, they had this idea that a group of, at least in the small Buddhist college, there were probably maybe 150 nuns in there, I'm guessing. And I think someone had asked a question with this very common misconception or idea that because they were Buddhist nuns, that meant that they, all just got along flawlessly. They're human. And their response, I can't remember everything they said, but I'll paraphrase it here, give you a general idea. But the nun responded to this. It was a female who'd asked the question, and they asked her if she had sisters, and she said yes. I don't remember how many. Let's just say 2. And she said, yes, I have 2 sisters. And the nun continued to ask her about that and what it was like. And she said, oh, we argue, we fight. I love them, but it's difficult sometimes, whatever her response was. And the nun listened and kind of smiled and then laughed. And she said, now imagine having 150 sisters living in the same place, eating in the same place, showering and using the same bathrooms. So if you think having 2 sisters was bad, imagine having 150. They're human. It's a challenge. So I get it, the idea of living in a monastery that maybe it seems like you're missing out, but I wouldn't trade that experience for anything in the world. But at the same time, after having gone through it, you realize that the real practice is right here, right now, with everything you're in. So read a couple books, watch a couple movies, and sit tight. So hopefully that's helpful. Let's see, a few things here to read. Thoughts on reincarnation. I'm new to this, but I believe different Buddhist traditions have different takes on it. Let me read the next one after lunch. Panic, sorrow. Okay. Let me start with reincarnation. There are different Buddhist traditions have different takes on it. Well, having different takes on it, that's like having different takes on the sun shining and it being 85 degrees. When the sun is shining and it's 85 degrees, that's it. the sun is out and it's 85 degrees. Now, if 100 of us line up and start describing what that's like, we'll all give you a different description of it. But it doesn't change the fact that the sun is shining and it's 85 degrees. So I think it's first important to understand that within Buddhist practice, everything, every teaching, every concept of reality is just our perception. Now, very specifically, Mario, with regards to reincarnation, a couple things, and I just talked about this, I think, last class, but the Buddha didn't invent it. He didn't create reincarnation or rebirth. He didn't just magically appear one day and say, we're all going to be reborn. In India, 2,500 years ago, 500 years before Christ, when the Buddha was alive, he was born Hindu family, was raised with Hindu faith and religion. And the view of everybody at that point in time was that there's a rebirth. There's different terms: rebirth, reincarnation, continuation of consciousness. So yes, different schools of Buddhism may refer to it differently, but it's important to understand that this is what existed at the time of the Buddha. So when the Buddha was teaching, everything he taught was to a crowd of people that all believed that they were going to be reborn. Now, for the most part, here in Western culture, Western religions, we explore Buddhism with this idea that we're going to go to heaven or hell, maybe, and that's it. So my suggestion always, especially for people who are new, is don't get hung up on this rebirth or reincarnation thing. I like to think of it as we're reborn every day, we're reborn every moment. One moment we wake up, we're in a good mood. One moment we wake up, we're in a bad mood. It's Groundhog Day. Each day is an opportunity to be reborn, right? Whatever happens when we die, that's going to happen when we die. So the only way to really control what happens when you die, whether it's going to heaven, going to hell, or your, stage of rebirth, the only thing that determines all of that is what you do right now. So that's what I would focus on, is what's your karma like now? What are your thoughts? What are your words? What are your actions now? And try not to get too hung up on this rebirth or reincarnation thing. For me, it never really made much sense. I've studied Buddhist teachings for a long time. And I eventually reached a point years ago where I said, look, 97% of everything the Buddha taught makes absolute perfect sense. So I'm just going to add in this rebirth and reincarnation thing as well. But I don't get wrapped up in it. I don't really speak on it too much unless questions come up. Because I think for people who are very new to Buddhism, they can kind of get hung up on, well, what's that Buddhist thing? They talk about us being reborn as like a bug or something like that. Right? I'm sure, Mario, in your life, you have felt like a bug. And you've probably had times in your life that you feel like a queen or a king, right? So think of rebirth as states of consciousness throughout our day. Hopefully that's helpful. Tibetan Book of the Dead. Lots of Tibetan Buddhist books specifically about rebirth and reincarnation if you're interested. But if you're new to Buddhism, that is the last place I think one should start exploring, or the last thing one should start exploring personally, because it's just going to confuse you and make you question way too many things, when I believe what the Buddha was teaching was, how can we be kind and compassionate to ourselves and others? And as that expression goes, let the chips fall as they may. Live your life with kindness and compassion. And when you die, let the chips fall as they may. Hopefully that's helpful, Mario. After lunch on Sunday with family, I saw my ex walk by and instantly felt a rush of panic, then sorrow. How do we handle these moments better without judgment or reminders of sadness, loss, grief? I feel constantly challenged with accepting loss and trying to practice gratitude or wisdom that comes from it, but so difficult. So for me, this practice about being present with things as they arise is be present with the emotions as they arise. But that's it. They're just present time experiences, right? So you see someone you used to have a relationship with, you go through panic, you go through sorrow, um, without judgment or reminder. You're not going to see someone that you were with and all of a sudden not have reminders. But realize that the reminders you're having are just illusions, right? We're not going to be just shut off from the world. If we've had relationships with people, or we've, are around family members or friends that have harmed us, or we've harmed them, right? Buddhist teachings or practice is not about just um, closing yourself off to those emotions as they arise, or pretending that they're not there, but just acknowledge them and try not to allow them to just take up so much space in your head. Right? You could see a flower that reminds you of someone. You could see a tree that reminds you of someone. You could see a bicycle that reminds you of someone. Our entire life is triggers. The law of cause and effect. That's our entire life. And so we see things that trigger us to think things. And this, in the Heart Sutra, is really what's taught as guarding the senses. So this idea that we are triggered by eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, or thought. Things that we are constantly driven by. What we see, what we taste, what we touch, what we hear, what we smell, what we feel, right? These drive us constantly. And it does start with that discriminating mind that sees something and judges it as good or bad or right or wrong, and either has an aversion to it or craves it. So we either run away from it or run towards it. But I think with the emotions, just recognize them as they arise and realize that they're just passing emotions. That's it. If you have an emotion that arises that brings sadness, then say, okay, label it as sadness, and that's it. But it doesn't have to be sadness for 3 weeks. If you recognize the emotion of sorrow, recognize the emotion of sorrow and move on. But we don't need to sit with it. Constantly come back to present moment, right? So the practice would be to see this person, to have it trigger the thoughts of panic and sorrow. And then what do you see next? Now you're back to what you're doing. You're with family, so now focus on family. Talk to them, listen to them, eat the food, whatever you're doing. Learn to stay present. This isn't about fixing emotions as they arise or fixing old feelings. It's about the practice of presence. The effort, right effort, would be you see an X, there's emotions that arise, now you're back to family, you're talking to family, and the effort is 100% diligent on focusing on that present moment, which is being with family. And if all of your effort is focused on that moment of being with family, then you're not sitting there thinking about and 3 days later asking about these thoughts. It's still stuck in your head. Learn to stay present. That's the practice. Constantly challenged with accepting loss. Again, these are, we throw out these ideas of accepting loss. You don't have to accept loss. The real harsh truth to me, the true nature of reality is that whether we accept loss or resist loss, loss occurs. So what I hear a lot with this line of thought and questions, which is very common and very welcome, because I think it'll help, I appreciate the questions because I think it'll help you cut through this stuff, is try not to use Buddhism as therapy. Try not to use Buddhism as something that's going to fix all this emotional trauma that you're dealing with. Buddhism says very clearly that yourself is an illusion. Your ego, your story is what you've created. And in this story, you have all these things and people and emotions. That's the problem. Don't use Buddhism to fix all that stuff. Use Buddhism to recognize that you're lost in your ego and your sense of self. and that the world's not about you. And if we can cut through this, then all the crap you're asking about goes away. Not an easy practice, but I think it's important and wise to approach it, well, with wisdom. And wisdom says that your ego was hurt and you created your ego. So that's a lot, I know, and not easy, but that'll get you started hopefully in the right direction. A lot of questions here, and we're running out of time, but let me see. New to Buddhism as well. How do you describe psychological effect that Buddhism? How would you describe the psychological effect that Buddhism has on someone? And then it seems like the aim of Buddhist practice is the end of suffering. Okay. Right, if it's correct, my practice fell a bit. All right, so I'm going to close with these two questions, and they kind of tie together. And as always, welcome to the new people, Jessica, Megan, if you're new. I'll sum this up. I would not try to figure out what is the psychological effect that Buddhism has on someone. Buddhism is not a drug. It's not something that has this, like, it doesn't consume you. It doesn't change you. The only thing that changes you is you. Buddhism is not something outside of yourself. Buddhism is a way of life taught by someone 2,500 years ago that brings to light you. I've always described Buddhist practice as like looking in the mirror. And when you look in the mirror, it reflects back on you. So I guess to answer your question is, when you explore the nature of your own mind, if that makes you miserable, then Buddhism is going to make you miserable. When you explore the nature of your own mind, if that makes you feel pleasant, then Buddhism is going to make you feel pleasant. What I mean by this is Buddhism doesn't make you feel any way. You make yourself feel every way, and this is exactly what Buddhism was teaching. You have an opportunity to explore what makes you feel pleasant and unpleasant. You have an opportunity to make you to explore what makes you feel peaceful and not so peaceful. So these things aren't because of Buddhism. Buddhism is just a mirror. So it's important to understand that as a new person. You're not putting your faith in some other thing or person or belief or religion to fix you or change you. And to kind of dive into the next question, and I'll close on this, Megan, because I think these do play together. I wouldn't look at Buddhist practice having this aim of ending suffering. And the question of, is that a realistic goal for the average practitioner? And Jessica, hopefully that helps you understand things for now, and also with you in mind jumping into Megan's question, because again, I think they do play off of each other, right? I've been around Buddhism for 20 something years, practicing every day for 17 years. I don't wake up and think, okay, my goal is to end suffering today. I don't think whether you're an average practitioner, whatever that means, or a brand new practitioner, or you've been at this for 50 years, I wouldn't set goals or expectations with Buddhist practice. For me, as a practitioner, I think, can I suffer less today than I did yesterday? Can I suffer less today than I did yesterday? These are not goals. These are not expectations. These are practices. The practice is, if I'm kind and if I'm honest and if I'm morally and ethically sound today versus yesterday, then I will suffer less today and cause less pain and suffering today than I did yesterday. But if you read a couple books on Buddhism and you show up to a couple classes and you think, well, okay, I'm going to end suffering sometime in the next 6 weeks, you're going to be really disappointed. There was a friend of mine a couple years ago, and he said 30 years ago in college, he took a class on Buddhism and he opened up the book and he read 2 pages and it said life is suffering. He closed the book and he said, well, this sucks. Why would I explore some teaching that talks about suffering? Well, he never went to page 3. So yes, I get it. on a very surface level, you can read, life is filled with suffering and this practice is to end suffering. But there's so much that goes on in between there. If you remove ending suffering as a goal, and you remove ending suffering as this like objective that you're trying to accomplish, and just do the work of kindness and compassion every day, the rest takes care of itself. So hopefully that's helpful. As far as there being realistic goals, again, with Buddhist practice, I wouldn't set any goals. Just be present and be aware. Coming back to Jessica's question, be honest with yourself. Hold that mirror up and ask yourself, am I being kind? Am I being compassionate? Am I being generous? Am I being wise? Am I being patient? Ask yourself these questions. It is an honest exploration of this idea that you call yourself. So I hope that's helpful. Great questions. Always, of course, challenging virtually, but this is what we have. So I appreciate you being here. I'm going to close on that. And the last thing I'll say, again, to those who are new, is Buddhism can be overwhelming and seemingly confusing. But for me as a practitioner, it's very simple. Think good thoughts, speak good words, do good deeds. That's the heart of this practice. Try not to complicate it. Try not to get too confused with all these languages and cultures, and countries. Try to simplify Buddhist teachings. Be kind. Most likely everything you'll learn about Buddhism you were taught when you were 5 years old. We've just failed to do it for so long, and therefore here we are showing up later in life thinking, oh, please help me, I need something to save me. And this is forcing you back to yourself. So with that, we'll go ahead and join palms as we close. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to those who need it most. So a few just kind of closing announcements before you head off, especially for those who might be new. Welcome. My name is Jeff. I'm a Dharma Bum. We opened up the Dharma Bum Temple 14 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those of us who lead, myself included, we're not monks, we're not nuns, we're not gurus, we're not masters, we're not teachers, we're not looking for students, we're just practitioners. We do our best to take our understanding of Buddhist teachings and put it into terms that hopefully make sense to those who show up. So each night we have different people leading different classes, whether it's here on YouTube, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday, or on Zoom. We have a huge recovery community, college group, teen group, family group. So just the website has all the information. We closed March 12th, so the temple physically has been closed for the last 8 months, which of course has been challenging, but we are really wanting to make sure that we put people's health and safety as the number one priority. So we will remain closed until we feel it's safe to open. So we have about 90% of our classes all online. So every morning, every night, there's something going on through the Dharma Bum Temple. So thank you for being here tonight. And as I said earlier, if I never see you again, think good thoughts, speak good words, do good deeds. That really is the heart of this practice. Man, I hope to see you all soon.